So this is my focused observations report presentation, and it's by me, Caitlin Freund. My focus for these observations was on question asking techniques that the teacher uses and the impact that they have on classroom management and the learning of the ELL students in the classroom. So in general, I'm going to be looking at how the teacher asks questions and the teachers follow up on the questions and how the teacher responds to any confusion that the students might have and how that impacts the classroom environment and the learning of the students that are in the classroom. So now I'm just going to kind of go over the general observations that I've had for each of my observations. So starting with case 961, this teacher, the teacher in this lesson asked a question or some questions to draw on the kids' previous knowledge, and then she called on some volunteers to just kind of get a baseline as to where the students are at. And then after, she asked some follow-up questions to deepen the understanding, so she really pulled up on their prior knowledge prior to the lesson even starting. Throughout the lesson, she asked a lot of check for understanding questions and giving a lot of positive feedback, which really encouraged the students to volunteer. However, she did mainly call on volunteers. There wasn't really any random calling on students at all, and there were a lot of pair-share discussions, so students were engaged throughout the entire lesson. For case 956, the lesson was mainly done in pairs. There was a little bit of activating prior knowledge before the lesson, but almost instantly she broke everybody off into pairs and began the lesson. She did ask some guiding questions throughout, but her feedback wasn't very positive, wasn't very energetic. It was kind of just neutral, which kind of did affect the participation of students, and she only asked check for understanding questions at the end, so she didn't really know where the students were at during the lesson, and just like the previous case, she did mainly call on volunteers during the lesson. So for observations 3 and 4, these were both really good cases in my opinion. They both asked a lot of activating prior knowledge questions, so the students were really involved and really thinking before the lesson even started. For case 970, when she would ask a question and the students would respond, she would repeat and expand on the answers and then ask follow-up questions based on the students' answers to other students. So it was kind of a teacher-led student discussion of the entire class, which I thought was really cool. There's a lot of positive feedback and pair-share discussion, so students were engaged, they were positive, they were motivated throughout the entire thing. And if a student did have a little bit of a wrong answer or they were close but not quite there, the teacher would kind of lead another student discussion so that students would collaborate until the student got to the right answer. So I really liked that part of it, and the teacher did a great job of calling on both volunteers and non-volunteers, kind of keeping the kids on their toes and making sure that they were paying attention and focused throughout. For case 959, the students had to model their thinking process throughout, which I thought was kind of unique to this case. She would go around to any pair share discussions and have the students walk her through what their thinking process was, what they were doing, why they were doing it, and she was giving a lot of positive feedback. And just like case 970, she was asking follow-up questions if a question was confusing to a student and allowing for a lot of student collaboration. And something specific to this case was there was great check for understanding and great lesson closure. She spent probably 5 to 7 minutes just on the lesson closure, pointing out asking them what they had learned and asking them how it applies to other situations that they've had in their lives. So I just thought that was something really good specifically to this case about question asking. So on the flip side, for observations 5 and 6, I thought that in terms of question asking techniques, these two examples weren't quite as good. They were both kind of all over the place with their question asking techniques. For case 970, the activating prior knowledge was teacher-led only, so she would kind of walk through the activating prior knowledge portion of it without asking any questions or without getting the students really engaged in that. And throughout the lesson, there weren't many questions being asked. It was kind of just the teacher standing up there talking. However, when she did ask a question, she would call on volunteers. So students knew that if they wouldn't get called on if they didn't volunteer. There was a little bit of group work. However, at the end, instead of having the students share what they came up with during their small group work, the teacher would share what each group came up with. So there wasn't really a lot of like there wasn't really a lot of the students talking in front of the whole class. If they were talking, it was because they volunteered to get called on, or it was during their small group work, but they weren't really sharing their ideas. It was a teacher sharing their ideas. And then look at on the other side, for case 1626, there wasn't really any activating prior knowledge going on. However, she did ask the students to compare the lesson to their own lives, but other than that, there wasn't really any activating prior knowledge. It was really just only lesson importance going on, and her kind of philosophy was having the students shout out their answers to the questions rather than calling on students or calling on non-volunteers. So that kind of left out some students from volunteering, because I noticed that some of the students kind of just got away with not volunteering or not sharing their answers at all, and would kind of just sit back and the teacher would just move on. So they kind of slipped through the cracks there. So overall, I thought these two observations weren't as good as the previous ones. So for observations 7 and 8, these two were decent examples when looking for good question asking techniques, in my opinion. For case 947, it was mainly a class discussion. The teacher did begin with some good activating prior knowledge questions, which I really liked, and she gave them some general class discussion questions and kind of let them kind of lead the discussion, so it was more student-led rather than teacher-led. And oftentimes you would have to ask questions to get the class back on topic, so maybe if she intervened a little bit more, it could have been a more meaningful discussion because they got off topic a lot. She gave a lot of positive feedback. She was really energetic, so that was true for both of these cases. And at the end, she asked for questions comparing like this topic to other topics that they've learned about, maybe in a different subject or a different topic in science, so that was kind of a good way to wrap up the questions. However, overall, there weren't really many check for understanding questions, which I was kind of upset about. And then looking at case 1632, she did a great job of providing positive feedback as well, and she would ask clarifying questions if students were confused, which was good. Again, she didn't really activate prior knowledge very well, unlike the previous case, but she did do a great job of calling on non-volunteers and also having the students do some choral reading or choral answering in response to her questions, so that kind of benefited the ELL students in the classroom most likely. And she also had very good lesson closure, kind of bringing in the lesson importance and bringing in kind of everything that they learned and doing some good check for understanding questions. For my 9th observation, I looked at case number 74, and this, in my opinion, was not one of the best examples of question asking techniques as we've talked about in class. So she did do a lot of positive feedback, and she would summarize a student's answer if it was long or if it wasn't quite what she was looking for to kind of correct them, but there wasn't really any activating prior knowledge. The structure of the lesson was kind of all over the place, but her questions in itself were pretty deep. As she asked for evidence of an answer that a student gave. However, there was a lot of individual work time. I mean, we learned that it's good to have some individual work time to kind of check for understanding and to let them process through what they learned, but in this lesson specifically, there was a lot of it where there was a lot of time where no questions were being asked and there wasn't really much going on other than the students working, so the teacher didn't really know what was going on with her students and where they were at with their understanding of characterization, which is what this lesson was about. And then for observation 10, case 958, I thought this was a very good overall way to end my observations. I was glad I ended with a good one. Had a very good activating prior knowledge. She asked a lot of questions, making them think, making them bring back some of their knowledge, not only from like reading and writing, but from other times that they may have had to come in contact with the information that they were going to be going over in the lesson. She did a lot of pair sharing. She had great feedback to their answers, and she called on non-volunteers. This teacher was probably the best at that, making sure that she called on students who don't participate as much, who aren't as involved in the pair share discussions, making sure that they're not slipping through the cracks, because those students are, as we learned, most often ELLs. And she also had very good lesson closure questions to just kind of bring the lesson all together and check for understanding. So this case was probably my favorite overall, and I just thought that the teacher did a really, really good job at bringing it all together and providing a good lesson to her students. So to just go over some of the things that I saw that had an impact on classroom management and learning process of ELLs, I have a small list here. I did touch on these a lot during my observations when I was just explaining them, but I just wanted to put them all in one place to kind of summarize what I observed and how that impacted the classroom environment. So first, calling on non-volunteers kept all students engaged. Most teachers that I saw did mainly rely on calling on volunteers, as most teachers that I've come into contact with or observed have also done, but we've learned that calling on non-volunteers keeps all the students engaged, all the students focused, and I did notice in my observations through the Atlas videos that this was true. I noticed that when the teachers would call on non-volunteers during the pair share, and during the actual lesson, they looked more engaged. They were asking more clarifying questions, making sure that they were following along with the teacher, instead of realizing that if they didn't raise their hand, they wouldn't get called on. So calling on non-volunteers did benefit the students overall. My next kind of reflection was that when students would correlate answers or shout out the answer, some students just wouldn't answer the question, but the teacher would move on. I know I mentioned this. Usually when these kind of situations happen, ELLs fall through the cracks and are kind of left behind, and the teacher doesn't notice because, if she hears a loud answer, then she probably just assumes that all the students in the class know the answer, but she doesn't realize that there may be some of the students that aren't as confident or don't know the answer and just aren't participating. So I did notice that. I also noticed that strong activating prior knowledge in general helped the lesson run more smoothly, and there were fewer clarifying questions, and the discussions and the questions that were asked were kind of deeper, and they were able to get to a further level in the lesson, and it was just a better run lesson overall. And then positive feedback to questions resulted in more student participation. When the teachers were kind of more neutral in their kind of answering the questions, it kind of just impacted the classroom environment in a way that it made the class seem less fun and less motivational to students. So the positive feedback really helped students stay engaged, want to participate, want to be involved, want to ask questions, which is really important to have in the classroom when you're trying to benefit both ELLs and native English speakers. So there were three things that I really pulled out that were the strongest in these observations that connected to Lang 380 and Lang 382 that I noticed. The first being that most of the lessons were teacher-centered, and the lessons that were taught teacher-centered ran more smoothly and fostered more participation from students, because as we learned, every ELL student has that double challenge of both content and language, so making the lessons teacher-centered really helps them work through both of those obstacles. And when the lessons were teacher-centered, I saw a lot more core repetition, teacher-modeled thinking, and lots of check for understanding questions to really make sure that none of those ELLs get left behind, none of those ELLs fall through the cracks. So those were some of the things that I noticed right off the bat when a lesson was teacher-centered, and just how much better the lesson ran overall, rather than letting it be student-led and kind of having it be a free-for-all and not really knowing where the students are at. The next connection that I saw was pair sharing. We talked a lot about that in Lang 380 in class. The lessons that had pair sharing kept all the students involved. This is definitely going to be a technique. I've never heard of this technique before this class, but this is definitely going to be a technique that I use in my lessons, because it touches on speaking and listening skills, and it makes sure that all students are involved and the teacher can kind of go around and work in smaller groups. So just overall, it's just a really, really good technique that I really liked. So I wanted to put this in this presentation. And then, of course, as we always talk about, motivation, and as motivation goes up, learning goes up, and this is best seen through positive feedback and teacher and peer encouragement, and this resulted in a lot more participation and interest from the ELLs in the classroom and just from all students in general, and makes it a lot more of a friendly environment for students. So I wanted to put that in there because that's one major thing that I got out of taking both of these classes overall. And then this was my reference, just the Atlas website, and of course the books that we had in the class and my own brain and any lectures that we did. So I just want to say thank you for taking the time to listen to my presentation, and I hope you have a good day.